is the chief of Ethan is the chief of oncology at the University of North Carolina. Here, Ethan is focused on treating patients with prostate cancer. And Ethan has demonstrated that the impact of electronic patient-reported outcomes, or EPROs, as we will call them today, has improved the quality of life, reduced hospitalizations, and also lengthened overall survival for patients with cancer. So Ethan will really bring a patient-centered care perspective, a cancer outcomes research perspective, and real-world evidence perspective to this conversation today. Next, we have Dr. Lynda Chin. Lynda is the founder and CEO of Apricity Health. Lynda is a dermatologist by training, and she's a really renowned cancer genetics scientist. Lynda has done cancer research in many organizations such as the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, also Harvard Medical School, and she's held numerous leadership positions within many health systems across the US. So Lynda will really bring a genomics and AI, ML, big data and medicine, leadership and healthcare perspective to this conversation today. And last but no means least, we have Dr. Andrew Norden, who is the Chief Medical Officer of OncoHealth. So Andrew is a neuro-oncologist by training. He spent many years at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute as well. He was previously the CMO of COTA and also the Chief Health Officer of a small company called IBM. So Andrew brings really kind of deep expertise in AI, ML, data analytics, and real-world evidence generation as well. So welcome to our panel today. Just a quick note before we jump in, the participants or the attendees, please ask any questions throughout the webinar. You can do so in the Q&A box at the bottom. We may be able to take some questions throughout the duration of the webinar. Otherwise, we'll leave some time at the end to get through as many questions as we can. So thank you so much to our panelists for being here. To kick us off, I'm really interested in kind of getting to know you guys more on a personal level. We're used to seeing your names in print. You are the ad board members of the HealthXL Oncology community as well. And I'm really interested in, why did you dedicate your professional life to the field of oncology? And I'm also interested in learning a little bit about an aspect of your career that you're most proud of for its impact on patients or oncology patients to date. So maybe Andrew, I'll start with you.
Great. Well, thanks, Julie, and really an honor to be here with Lynda and Ethan. So why did I go into oncology in the first place? Like all of us, I suppose my career has had twists and turns. Certainly for me, it was the experience of caring for cancer patients during my residency that pushed me in this direction. Not many people know that, in fact, I am a neurologist by training. I was always fascinated by the brain and neuroscience. And I had the opportunity to take care of cancer patients, both as a medical as an internal medicine intern, and then as brain tumor patients as a neurology resident. And I found that those patients were really, they were going through a terrifying, life-altering experience. And that was compelling to me. All sorts of opportunities as an oncologist to help patients who are going through cancer, whether that's sharing information with them, mapping out some kind of a treatment plan, helping them even come to terms with end-of-life issues, which sadly is quite common in the neuro-oncology realm. And I was also compelled by the fact that oncologists and cancer patients have a long-term relationship. As an oncologist or a neuro-oncologist, in my case, you become much like a primary care physician, but yet you get to engage in helping patients through this complex and really scientifically fascinating disease where we've had incredible therapeutic advances and all sorts of opportunities to improve outcomes, both whether with therapies, with diagnostics, with the experience of care. So all of that together really drew me in.
Thank you, Andrew.
Shall I stop there, Julie, or is I
That
defer?
sounds great. Yeah, no, that's really wonderful, Andrew, and it sounds extremely gratifying. Maybe before we move on to one of the other panelists, I'm interested, is there an aspect of your career to date that you're most proud of for its impact on oncology patients, whether it's their treatment, prevention, something like that?
Yeah, so it's interesting how my dog chooses now to bark aggressively, and I apologize for that, but this is
I can't hear it at all.
the work from home life that we're all part of.
We're used to it.
So well, you know, I think perhaps my most proud professional achievement actually has come at OncoHealth, where I am currently. And you know, I always am careful to not sound like I'm selling anything, because I'm certainly not in this setting. But I have to give you a little bit of background so that I can talk about it. And that is that OncoHealth was originally a prior authorization company. We support oncology. We support payers in doing oncology prior authorization. And in the interest of getting closer to patients and helping them in, I would say, less abrasive ways than I think we do in prior authorization, we built a digital cancer care management platform, and we call it Iris. It's a cool platform that patients access through an app, and it allows them to have text, audio, and video interactions with oncology nurses, social workers, and peer mentors who are people who've gone through cancer experiences themselves. And then it includes also things like symptom tracking and alerting and content and self-guided exercises and even nutrition. So a bunch of cool things. When I came to OncoHealth, the vision included all of those things, but it didn't include mental health. You know, for me, much of my career much of my provider-oriented career was at Dana-Farber, you know, an urban academic subspecialty oriented center, where all the resources that exist probably anywhere in the world are available.
Sure.
And yet few of my patients could benefit from the mental health care that they needed. There just weren't enough staff, and there were no means for providing mental health support that didn't involve in-person visits with staff. And then I also had a role at Dana-Farber where I oversaw a community-based network. And in the community-based network, there might be one social worker a few days a week for a vast population of patients, all with a variety of different diseases. And so even fewer patients could benefit. So, you know, what we did with Iris is we centralized a team of oncology experienced social workers. We got them licensed up all over the country. Not an easy endeavor, and that's an important barrier that we may want to talk about later. But at any rate, we managed to do that, and now through our relationships with payers, we're making Iris and hence oncology mental health care available to patients, and they can take care of it, take advantage of that, you know, from their own homes at convenient times without having to travel to the clinic. They have the privacy of home, and you know, and what we're seeing is that patients who would not be able to benefit from mental health support for the depression or anxiety, or simply communication challenges, end-of-life considerations, et cetera, that they're experiencing, are now able to benefit through Iris. So I'm really, really proud of that work, and it's scaling up, and I hope that we will be successful in continuing to scale it.
Sounds great, Andrew. And it sounds like you really come full circle in terms of what led you to oncology, that kind of journey with the patient, long-term relationships, and working with them through end of life. So it makes sense. Lynda, I'm interested, you made the switch from dermatology over to oncology. What was the kind of motivations behind that, and why have you been so motivated to work in this field for the past number of years?
Well, an honor to join the conversations here. Yeah, so I was trained and clinically practiced as a solo dermatologist. But what got me interested in oncology really is the research aspect. I have always been, throughout my training, interested in molecular biology, molecular genetics. And as the technology evolved, I became really interested in studying, not just taking care of patients. And really the cutting edge was happening in oncology. And so with my emphasis in genomics, which was, lots of story to tell how I ended up in genomics, from creating mouse model, which is how I started, creating mouse model, to, getting into human genomic, cancer genomics. But that really was the leading pole that got me into cancer as a whole, and really love the potential and the excitement of working in new technology and generating data, and therefore the need for new analytics, and then the need for new infrastructure to support the data and the analytic results for the propagation of that. And I think that's really where some of my most, when I think about, just following up through the next question, which is, an aspect that I'm most proud of, I think it's really hoping to contribute to the whole Cancer Genome Atlas effort, particularly developing as a PI at the Broad Institute, developing the platform, it's called Firehose, that was standardizing the way the Cancer Genome Atlas is sharing its data broadly with the community. It was a public resource project. Data is public resource and it is available publicly. Once the data is QA, but majority of the scientists, clinicians, or any researchers do not have the infrastructure to access that data. Us raw data, and no hardware, software, and analytics skills. So the idea of this data platform, Firehose, is to make that data not just available, but usable by a broad community. And I think, that connecting with other capability that's being built within the TCGAs, like the CBio portal, it really make the Cancer Genome Atlas data available to a small lab, to a big pharma, and everything in between. And I think that's probably, one thing that I felt like I really have contributed more than any single study publication that I've ever, produced. And I think that also led me to where I think, sort of align with our conversation today, because that really taught me the power of a platform. Platform that's not sexy, doesn't get you, the novel discovery necessary, but it is sort of generating the impact that enables. So I think I like to sort of have a conversation about how platform capability can sort of scale impact of any one solution or any one technology as we look toward the future.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lynda. And it's been such a fascinating field to be in over the past kind of decade or two, in terms of all the molecular advances that has happened in oncology, along with the tech and the big data. And I know data sharing has been, such a huge kind of topic of conversation. It's a barrier that I'm sure we'll get to later as well. So thank you for providing that example. It's really exciting. And last but not least, Ethan, who is still kind of focused on treating patients every day with prostate cancer. I'm really interested in what first kind of drew you to the field.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for hosting today and for the invitation. My reasons are very similar, I think, to those expressed by Andrew and Lynda. I've found that oncology is a field where relationships with patients are very deep and very meaningful. And so I have appreciated being a part of the lives of patients as they go through a really profound moment in their lives, and to have the ability to support patients and caregivers and families during that period, I've just found to be extremely meaningful to me. As a field, I was also drawn to oncology because of the innovation, the pace of innovation, the breadth of innovation, the opportunities to be involved with, the span from digital health to drug and device discovery, I found to be intellectually extremely gratifying. And I've had a long-standing interest in connected health technologies spanning back, 30 years or so. And so I've enjoyed being able to be a part of that wave of digital health. I mean, in oncology and across chronic illnesses in particular. But oncology has been a space where we've really seen the applications of digital health having meaningful impact on people. And I think, as we're going to discuss today, I think the best is yet to come. I think there's, tremendous opportunities for technology now to meet many of the challenges that we as providers or as operational leaders in the delivery of cancer care face every day.
Thank you so much.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you so much, Ethan. We're so lucky to have folks like you guys working in this field. And maybe just to jump into what you last said, the best is yet to come. I'm really interested, what are, the couple of innovations that you are most excited about for their potential impact on oncology care in the next kind of 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, well, my own space has been around remote monitoring of patients. And, I think that remote monitoring, whether it's symptom monitoring or using biometric connected devices, or using, data collection for risk stratification or aggregation of large data, what have you, the opportunities I see for remote monitoring are that it really dovetails to many of the other parts of oncology that are arising as being essential, largely related to care coordination and navigation, but also to decentralization of clinical trials, chemotherapy at home, non-real-time management of patients. So all of the trajectory that we see and how care is going to be delivered in the future, which is not going to be, come to my office at the time that I say in the context that's dictated by me, but rather is meeting patients where they are and really broadening our model and using technologies, I think, are laid on a foundation of remote monitoring, which again is a field that I've been very interested in. But I think that all of those pieces that I mentioned are tremendous opportunities for technology, either as standalone solutions or as means to support the humans who are trying to, who are overwhelmed currently with the magnitude of our task, who really we can't do it alone. And so I think, to me, that's the opportunity, figuring out how do we harness technology to address the way that oncology care is evolving.
That sounds great. Thank you, Ethan. And I agree, the continuous monitoring has impact across so many facets of care. Maybe before we move on to Lynda and Andrew's perspective, I wanted to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about a study that successfully demonstrated the impact of ePROs or of continuous monitoring on patients with cancer? I know there's been some phenomenal results, so I wanted just for you to give you an opportunity to mention this to the broader audience.
Yeah, sure. I can mention some of the work that my group has done, and that others have done. And one of the questions you asked previously about some of the more gratifying moments that we've had professionally, I'd say that for me, what's been really gratifying is conducting collaborative research that has been able to demonstrate the benefits, the clinical and utilization benefits of using connected health technologies to interface with patients, to monitor patients, which, I think it makes a lot of intuitive sense. It's funny how you go to lengths to prove things that are sort of commonsensical. But at the end of the day, I think having those data does empower us to then think about, how we bring these ideas into the field. So to your question, probably for going back 25 years or more, the group that I had starting at Sloan Kettering and then at the University of North Carolina did a lot of work just looking at the feasibility of engaging patients to report on their own symptoms, their own toxicities, their financial toxicity, their social determinants of health, their caregiver support, et cetera. And, you know, through probably about a decade of work, we showed that it was feasible to do this, that it was highly informative, that it provided information that we as providers wouldn't otherwise have. But I'd say that the work that was most impactful came in 2017 when we published what was called the STAR study, which was a large single-center trial demonstrating that weekly symptom self-reporting by patients compared to standard care led to substantial and significant clinical benefit. So I think, as you alluded to, that weekly monitoring of symptoms and then triggering alerts to nurses about severe or worsening symptoms on a regular basis translated into improved patient experience, improved patient satisfaction. It decreased emergency room visits, it decreased hospitalizations, it improved quality of life and physical function, and ultimately also led to improved overall survival. And interestingly, the patients who were undergoing remote monitoring were able to stay on cancer treatment an average of 2 months longer. And this was done, I should have mentioned, in a group of patients with advanced and metastatic cancers. So, you know, patients who had a limited lifespan already were able to stay on treatment longer, and that translated probably into improved survival. That finding was then reproduced by colleagues of ours in France, who did a prospective study largely in lung cancer, and then a group in Canada did a huge population-based study in over 120,000 patients, and they reproduced the findings again. And since then, there have been numerous studies showing improved quality of life and decreased emergency room visits. So that's sort of where we are now. I think the challenge has been in implementation. You know, I think despite, you know, I'd say a pretty compelling critical mass of evidence and inclusion in national guidelines about the benefits of remote symptom monitoring, it has been slow going for there to be widespread implementation in practice for a host of reasons that we can talk about.
Absolutely, Ethan. I'm keen to kind of dig into that once we get to the barriers, because you've shown the value. I think if I read correctly, the impact on survival with this relatively simple ePro technology was greater than a lot of the drugs that were brought to market in the year that you launched this study. And this is a simple tool with no toxicity. So, you know, it's amazing the value that you have demonstrated, and now there's a lot of tough work to bring it into implementation. Before we talked about the barriers, and I see someone's added a question about cost, I'm interested to hear from Lynda and Andrew on the innovations that you are most excited about that are poised to kind of transform oncology care. And then we can dig into these barriers a little more. Lynda, I'll direct this question to you.
Okay. Well, I actually want to follow up on Ethan's point, because I think if there's so much going on, but if we look at the use of digital cloud mobile technology and data, and I think ePro and how it can translate into better outcome is a great example of what technology is supposed to do for us. And it's also a great example because it highlighted, as Ethan said, the challenge in implementation, which is not technology. And I think that's really where we have to come to realize, you know, for us to transform and really impact the outcome and the care delivery, we have to acknowledge that technology is only one part. You know, there's the people, and then there's the workflow and all the reality of implementing. And then there's the externality, reimbursement, regulatory, and everything else, licensing across state. I mean, I think that's already been mentioned. All of those things impact on, you know, the implementation. So while I think in terms of technology driven, I think the ePro example Ethan cited was definitely my top 1 or 2 example of what technology is supposed to do for us in healthcare. The other example I would say is how we can leverage, and this is sort of adjacent, how we really can use technology like genomic sequencing to completely transform not just how we treat, but how we think about cancer, what cancer really is. It's a fundamental shift in, diagnosis, in treatments. And we have done tremendous advances in that space over the last 20 years. And it's been fortunate to be involved in that process. But the challenge and the disappointment is that has not translated to the extent that we all hope in patient care. And that comes back to exactly the same problem that Ethan mentioned, is implementation. It is everything else other than the technology of sequencing. We can do it cheap now, just like we can do ePro monitoring and do it way better than 15 years ago when Ethan started it. But how do we drive adoptions? And that's really where for us to get to the future of cancer care in 2040, it's not a technology problem we have to solve. It is the non-technology problem that we're dealing with.
Lynda, thank you so much for that. I think, it's really important to bear that in mind. And I'm really excited to get into the meat of that. Prior to doing so, Andrew, I just wanted to give you a chance to mention any of the technologies that you're most excited about, if they haven't been already mentioned. And given your background, I'm expecting an AI and ML.
Okay. Most of the things have already been mentioned, frankly. I would maybe broaden Lynda's point about genomic sequencing to think about blood-based technologies. And obviously that was sort of implied there, but I think being able to look in blood rather than having to biopsy every time you want to assess a tumor's molecular biology, I think is going to be really meaningful. And that's increasingly, I think, proving to be the case. And I expect that will continue. While I think there's amazing opportunities for AI and ML, my own take is that they're somewhat more relevant on the R&D side than they are on the care delivery side. I spent the early part of my industry career, as you alluded to, at IBM Watson Health, maybe a decade ago now, where there was, I would say, great enthusiasm about the potential for AI-based systems to make clinical decision support recommendations. I think that is a fraught endeavor, and one that maybe isn't ready for prime time even today. Promising, but not ready for prime time. The one caveat I might make there is that I do think generative AI and that we're starting to see in the media and such has amazing potential to improve maybe communication. And I think about the fact that a lot of communication is lost on patients because of the timing with which it's delivered, or the lack of cultural sensitivity with which it's delivered, or maybe the even perhaps in some cases information is delivered at the wrong grade level. And I've already seen use cases where generative AI can sort of address each of those things in a rapid way. I think that creates a really interesting opportunity to sort of bolster and improve human communication in a way that I'm excited to see how that plays out in oncology, but I think it has amazing potential.
For sure. It's really interesting to see some of the tools that have come to market. Sorry, Lynda.
Yeah, and I want to just, sort of get down to some of the specific, right? Because one of the challenges of implementations, both whether it's in, leveraging genomic technology and implement it broadly, or ePro, is really workforce. Because we think a lot about digital technology as a way of improving access or creating access points, where you don't have to just come see the doctor, at their time, at their location. Great, foundational. But we need to start thinking about, now that you put a phone in the patient's house, who is answering the call on the other end? And if the person answering the call on the other end don't have the right skill set, and that could be understanding the person you're talking to and being able to talk to them in a culturally sensitive way that they can communicate effectively, or they really understood the science, the medicine behind it, and being able to make that clinical decisions appropriately. And I think that's one big, not the only one, one of the biggest barrier to implement the ePro, the genomic, all the other things that we think as a solution that's been demonstrated. And I certainly believe I've come around the last 15 years to really recognize how do we start thinking about all this technology as an augmentation to the humans. I am not ready, and I don't know that I ever will say that we don't need the human beings, right? So I'm not the one that says the robot will, see you now. I don't actually agree with that sentiment, but I absolutely believe that every clinician, whether it is the nurse or whether it's a subspecialist, can benefit from that technology because it will broaden the skill set, the knowledge base of that individual. And that's where I think if we can really apply that, and I agree, generative AI has a huge potential to take that on and help us address that. And the other aspect is infrastructure, because these point solutions need to be broadly available to help patients. But to do that, we have to help the doctors. So I think one of the things that I focus a lot on with Apricity is not just connecting our drug discovery R&D, which we make great progress, but we have so much more that we can leverage if we can connect them with care delivery. But is really thinking about how do we bring the human back in the process to improve the care, but really using technology as a way of lifting all the human expert up to the next level, and do so with an infrastructure that's scalable. Because if we don't think about scalable solution platform to start with, we can demonstrate the end result is positive in a pilot. But the pilot, it's challenging to go from a pilot to a scalable solutions. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why I sort of left the academia role, because we're very good at demonstrating feasibility and in a, for lack of a better word, pilot way. But to make it a scalable solution, there are other things that simply need to be done. And that's where the platform infrastructure come in. And that is not what happened in academia. So we need to bring the industry and what they invest in with what the academia is great at doing. We got to bring them together, whether it's on the care delivery side or in the R&D therapeutic development side.
Yeah, I totally agree with Lynda that the biggest barriers that we face to integration of technologies also is the biggest opportunity. And that is related to workforce. It's related to the current use of labor in care delivery. It's related to roles and responsibilities. It's related, it's informatics, which involves both technology and the human factors components, and the workflow and the work streams. And my observation has been that many developers of technology don't control the clinical operations on the ground, right? They're trying to interact with clinical entities, whether they're large practices, or they're hospital-based practices, health systems, whatever, but they don't control the deployment of personnel, the roles and responsibilities of personnel, hiring, retraining, the chain of command. And so the true integration of technologies is completely hindered by that lack of control. And I think the adjunct to that is that on the clinical operational side or the clinical delivery side, there's limited control over the tailoring of the technologies. And so we have this sort of, this fragmentation that's an artifact of the structure of how these solutions are developed, which I think has prevented the technologies from truly integrating into workflow and the workflows from truly being able to influence, how the technologies are tailored. And so we frequently get stymied. I think the other piece of that I think Lydia is alluding to is reimbursement, right? The way that we're able to hire people, to change roles and responsibilities, to alter workflow has to do with incentives on the care delivery side. And this can either be positive or negative incentives, right? So either financial or regulatory. And those also have not really been optimally used to foster the integration of new technologies that can really improve the experience of patients and the efficiency and the quality of delivery of care. So to me, I think, the opportunity at the moment that I think many people are realizing in all of these camps, right, whether it's a payer or a sponsor or an operational leader in a health system or a technology developer, is that there needs to be a coming together of these pieces, right? Because our interests are largely aligned, but our processes have been misaligned. And I think that's the opportunity and the challenge of the moment.
Mhm.
Can I push back on one point you made? I don't think our interests are aligned. I don't think the interests of our payers, the interests of the health system, the interests of the provider or patients, I don't think they are aligned. And well, definitely not aligned with the payers. And I think that's one of the big problems. So I agree with you. I think the reimbursement or incentive is a big part of it. One of the biggest barrier, and I think that it's on the payer side, and I definitely believe that we have to have a coming together in the sense that I just don't think what that interests are aligned. But on the other hand, I also think we need to. I don't have the answer, but I think we need to innovate in what the business model on company or provider of these technology-enabled services are. I mean, I guess in some way I can think of the reimbursement challenge we're having had to do with the business model of care delivery, right? So, if the healthcare workforce challenge in adoptions of newer, better way of delivering care because there's this reimbursement thing that's sort of constrain what they can or want to do. Same thing on the technology enablement side. Business model is, I think, also need to innovate. And I don't have answer. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think we need to address those challenges on the business side, on both ends.
Yeah.
So I have to get one word in and just say,
Go.
Yeah, go do it. Yeah.
I actually, I don't agree, Lynda, that payers are like somehow on an island. I think it would be hard to find a payer, provider, or life sciences executive who doesn't agree that what we need to do in this country in the oncology industry is continue to improve outcomes and manage costs so that cancer care is affordable. I think fundamentally we all agree with that, and I think somehow it's incumbent on the industry to now sort of come together and say we have very compelling evidence that these technologies in fact can improve quality of care while maintaining or reducing costs. And therefore let's agree to figure out how to fund them at scale. And I think that's what needs to happen. Somebody asked in the chat, am I allowed to say that, Julie?
Yeah, please do. I saw the question on costs.
Yeah, I mean, somebody asked in the chat about the cost of ePros or other tools and how much it costs to apply those to disease management. In other words, what is the upfront cost compared to the longer term savings? And it's an important question, but I don't know that we know for sure at scale. I think Ethan's data and others suggest that at least in single center implementations and such, that the costs are small and the savings are medium to large. And I think there's reason to believe that will be true. If you put up the upfront costs of implementing, say, ePros against the cost of putting one patient on immunotherapy, you very quickly see that these electronic tools we're talking about are cheap interventions, and you don't sort of need a moonshot.
So I'm going to jump in on that point, right, Andrew? I think maybe I was trying to be provocative. I totally agree with you. One immunotherapy patient versus implementing ePro broadly for the entire practice, and that's where the misalignment is. There is no reimbursement incentive to implement that ePro. And there's every reimbursement incentive to put a patient on immunotherapy. And yes, we all altruistically want to improve outcome and reduce costs, but it comes down to actions. And then I was sort of more pointing out that unless the payer is reimbursing for implementing that infrastructure, the incentives are not aligned. Whether they wish to do so or not doesn't mean much if you don't translate to action. So I was just being a little bit of a hard ass pushing back on that statement.
That's
but
what
I
we
totally
need, Lynda.
agree with you. And I think ePro have demonstrated outcome.
Yeah.
We do need to address the problem of the workforce, because even if tomorrow they say, payers say, I'll pay you to do ePro, we're still stuck with not having the staffing, right? Where are you going to get the staff you need, especially if you're not in an urban center and you can't even hire nurses, for your clinic. So I think there's a business model innovation that's necessary, and technology can help. And we are at Apricity, we're trying to figure out, and by no means we know the answer, but we're figuring how to do that, addressing exactly that problem, what the workforce solution is that make it scalable. But broadly speaking, beyond any one thing we do here, among the three of us, I think the industry needs sort of a infrastructure. And unfortunately, I don't think infrastructure, the equivalent of the highway or the railroad system, should be built by a single entity. And we all know, I think that create challenge if we were. And what I think we're missing is our society, our government, or I don't know if that's the right word. We really need the highway that allow us to do it. But who should be building the highway? I don't think it should be any one company or, that we can think of. But I'm hoping that there is a broader initiative that really allow us to, all these solutions to jump onto this common infrastructure. Imagine that when Tesla come out with their first EV, they have to not only build charging station and build the car, they also have to build a highway, and that highway have to connect with all the other highway that only runs gas car. That's what we're dealing with. And I think we will constantly having that barrier if there isn't a broader public-private, I think that's probably the way I see it need to be, infrastructure build that enable technology to be connected, and importantly, technology like generative AI to augment people so that we address the workforce deficiency or insufficiency and be able to do that together, right?
Thank you, Lynda. I'm going to jump in because we have 10 minutes left and we have a couple of questions to get to. I just want to react to that. I totally agree with what you're saying. And in terms of Ethan, your group has proved the outcomes of this technology. Reimbursement is still a challenge, and we know that there's lots of challenges with quantifying the cost as it relates to labor and all the things that you guys have discussed. Ethan, before we move on, are there any kind of innovative business models that are emerging or reimbursement initiatives that might be small but might show us hope for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll say is, what implementation of ePros, the challenges on mask is the challenges of implementing any new care enhancement and delivery of care for chronic illnesses, including cancer. It's just a tough lift, right? If you look at ePros, you have to alter your technology, you have to alter your staff roles, your provider roles, you have to engage patients. You have to have sort of a quality infrastructure. So, whether it's ePros or, advanced care planning or chemotherapy pathways or integrating a network of multiple practices with a central hub, whatever it is, these things are really hard to do, right? They require human and technology solutions. And I think that one of the lessons of the past few years has been that we are, generally speaking, not very good at pivoting really quickly to meet the needs of the moment. And, we saw that, in spades during the pandemic when we had an exodus from the workforce and largely an inability of practices to make it work. I mean, we sort of made it work with the pivot to telemedicine, but it was very challenging. We're not that nimble. And so I think there's a recognition that it's very hard for practices to do this on their own, to kind of make it up, one by one. why do clinical trials work? They work because they're one-offs. It's like you put up the tent and then you take down the tent and you kind of ignore largely the inefficiencies of the broader setting by just sort of throwing money at the issue and enrolling that patient and kind of cobbling it together. But we're talking about wide-scale changes of the entire way that a practice functions, which is very hard to do. So I'll get to your question, but I would note that initiatives that I'm very excited about now are related to oncology medical home types of initiatives, either supported by payers or by neutral third parties that triangulate between practices and payers. So one example is ASCO's recent initiative, ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, right, which I think most people on the call probably know. It's in the largest oncology professional society in the world. So ASCO ran a pilot called the APC4 pilot with practices where they created an oncology medical home. They had certain expectations that were technology driven, related to decentralized trials, data aggregation, and to a host of different, high quality maneuvers related to navigation, monitoring to some extent. And now that model is being brought in vastly with a major investment by ASCO. And I think, my understanding is that ASCO's goal is to enroll practices into a model that they as a neutral third party oversee with expectations about what the practices will do, have an opportunity for technology vendors to come in and interact with those practices towards shared goals. Then ASCO will be a part of the discussion with payers to try to get past pre-authorization or some of the other, major headaches that practices face as a result of participating, in this program. So this is an example of trying to bring all the stakeholders together and find, I agree with Lydia, and our interests aren't always aligned, but there are some sweet spots where they are. And remote monitoring actually will be a part of that ASCO model, I believe. To your question, in the United States, CMS announced their voluntary payment model, the EOM, the Enhancing Oncology model, which is a follow-up to the OCM, the Oncology Care Model. And it's a voluntary payment model that will initiate this summer. And it involves several care enhancements that are required, and ePro monitoring is one of them. So there are, monthly, per member per month payments, these MEOS payments that are being made to practices to cover the, sort of the onboarding of these various care enhancements, including ePros. And it's expected in the EOM that by, I believe by the third year of participation in this 5-year program, that there'll be some reasonable use of ePros. It's sort of a gradual expectation from CMS. So this is an example where a total cost of care APM is including an expectation for ePro monitoring with third-party contractors that have been retained by CMS to help the practices with the implementation of the ePros, and they have a an ePro guide that's been created. I think there's a consortium called Proteus that produced a guide that CMS is referring to as well. So that's one example. There are multiple other sort of small programs by private payers that also include ePros. There are billing codes, as many people on the call probably know, for remote monitoring that don't exactly apply to ePros. They're more for like blood glucose monitoring, sort of device monitoring. But there is a lot of momentum at AMA for those codes to be brought in to encompass ePro monitoring. And I think when that happens, I think maybe there'll be more incentive. Sorry, long answer to your question.
No, it's good to hear about some of the initiatives that are starting up, and it's great to hear about some of those in the US, and I know there's similar ones starting in Europe, and you mentioned a great one in France when we spoke recently. So it's great to end the discussion on that note on some of the initiatives that are happening. I'm conscious we only have 3 minutes left. Lynda, thank you so much for answering some of those questions in the chat. I know that we've organically got to a couple around costs. I'm interested in, based on this discussion today on the advancements that are out there and, us collectively overcoming some of these challenges, what are your hopes for the future, Gwenish? as it pertains to oncology care delivery? What would a cancer patient go through in terms of their experience in 2040? And Andrew, maybe I'll direct this question to you.
Oh, geez, that's the hardest question, the crystal ball question.
Yeah.
But I do want to actually, Julie, I want to just give one line answer, which in part answer the question in the Q&A. I think what we think the opportunity in 2040 is what we used to call, what the National Academy called the learning health system. I would like to see us being able to integrate the everyday care with the R&D side and clinical trial in a seamless way. And I really believe technology can get us there. And that will change not just the care of today's medicine, but delivering of tomorrow's medicine that will improve the efficiency of the care today. So a learning health system is the 2040.
Thank you,
I mean,
Lynda.
I think that would be amazing. It's come slow. We've been talking about it for a while, but certainly I think the technology exists to enable what Lynda's saying. I mean, for me, I think all of the tools we've talked about around ePros and always on monitoring and telemedicine and the genomic testing and such, all of it exists today. And so really the 2040 hope is that it's available. And I would say I'm a little less optimistic that ASCO's new approach or EOM are going to get us far enough. I think we need to see some entity, probably in the government, make a deep and serious commitment that involves bigger dollars in order to like get us there by 2040. That's only 17 years away, and time flies. So that's what I would say. But anyway, I don't want to. We only have 1 minute left.
Thank
so
you, Andrew. We have 1 minute left. Ethan, can you maybe talk us through what you predict a cancer patient's experience would be in 2040 compared to today in under 60 seconds?
It's really hard to be a person with cancer. People feel like they're out there on their own, that their questions aren't being answered. It's a very challenging experience. And my hope is that through a combination of human and technology advancements, people will have their answers or their questions answered. They'll have immediate access to the care team and to resources, both for self-efficacy and for assistance of the team, and that we'll have the ability to identify quickly problems people are experiencing and elevate them. So the overall experience of being a patient with cancer is vastly improved.
Brilliant. It's great to end this conversation on that note of hope. Thank you so much to our panelists for being so generous with your ideas, your knowledge. I hope this has been a stimulating, thought-provoking conversation for our panelists and our audience. And I hope it provides some kind of ideas for what we need to do collectively and some hope for the future. So thank you so much. I could speak with you all day. If anyone is interested, you can continue the conversations. There's many happening on the HealthXL platform, so please feel free to do so. And thank you again to our ad board members and our panelists today.
Thank you.
Julie.
Have a great day, everyone.